I needed money for the down payment. It was just sitting there. Those were the words my son said to me when I asked where his mother's music box had gone. 11 words. That's all Margaret's memory was worth. To him, 11 words and a shrug. But what happened next? What the antique dealer told me when he called changed everything. And I mean everything. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years teaching high school history in Dayton, Ohio. And I thought I understood people pretty well. I thought I could read a room, read a situation, read the people I loved most. 31 years of watching teenagers grow into adults will give you that kind of confidence. Turns out I was wrong about the person who mattered most. Margaret and I met when we were both 22. She was working at a small bookstore on 5th Street, and I came in looking for a biography of Eisenhower. She handed me the wrong book on purpose. She told me years later, just to see if I'd come back to complain. I did come back. I never really left after that. We were married for 38 years. We raised our son, Derek, in a yellow house on Elm Creek Road with a big oak tree in the backyard that Derek climbed every summer until he was too old to think it was still cool. We took family vacations to the Smoky Mountains. We argued about small things and made up quickly. We built a life together the way most people do, slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of patience and a lot of love. Margaret collected music boxes. That was her thing. She started when she was a little girl. Her grandmother gave her a small white one with a ballerina that spun to a Chopin waltz, and she never stopped. By the time we'd been married 20 years, she had 43 of them on a set of shelves in the living room. Each one had a story. Each one had a specific memory attached to it. She knew every single one by heart, but there was one she kept separate from the rest. It sat on the nightstand on her side of the bed, and she never moved it to the shelf with the others. It was made of dark walnut wood, hand-carved, maybe 8 inches across, with a delicate floral pattern along the lid. She'd found it at an estate sale in Vermont when Derek was about 7 years old. She paid $40 for it, which, at the time, felt like an extravagance for us. It played a melody I never fully identified, something quiet and slow, almost like a lullaby. I asked her once why that one stayed on the nightstand instead of with the others. She smiled in the way she had, like she knew something you didn't and wasn't quite ready to tell you. Some things are for looking at, she said. Some things are for keeping close. I didn't push. That was Margaret. She had a layer of privacy that I learned early on to respect. It wasn't secrecy. It was just her. She was a woman who understood that not everything needed to be explained. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in March of 2021. By November, she was gone. I'm not going to spend a long time on those 8 months. Because if you've sat with someone through that kind of illness, you already know what it looks like. And if you haven't, no description I give will be accurate enough to matter. What I'll say is this: Margaret handled it with more grace than I could have. She handled it better than I did. She kept her sense of humor almost until the end. She made me promise to water her garden. She told me not to give her clothes away for at least a year because she didn't want me making rash decisions while I was grieving. She said it just like that, rash decisions, and then she laughed at herself for saying it. The music box on the nightstand stayed right where it was after she died. I didn't move it. I didn't open it. I didn't touch it. Actually, for the first few months I couldn't even look directly at it. It was like looking at the sun. I'd walk into the bedroom, and my eyes would go to it. And then I'd look away fast, the way you do when something hurts. Derek was 34 when his mother died. He lived about 40 minutes away in Columbus with his wife, Stacy. They had no children. Derek worked in sales, medical equipment. I think, though I'll be honest with you, I was never entirely clear on the details because he changed positions a lot and never seemed particularly enthusiastic about explaining what he was doing. Stacy worked in real estate. They came to help me after Margaret passed, and I was grateful for that. They stayed for 2 weeks, handled the paperwork, cooked meals, kept the house from feeling completely hollow. Derek seemed genuinely heartbroken about his mother. I had no reason to think otherwise. Over the next year, he started calling more, stopping by more. At first, I assumed it was grief that losing his mother had made him realize time was short, that he wanted to be closer to me. I welcomed it. I was lonely in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not the surface loneliness of being alone in a house, but something deeper. The loneliness of having spent 38 years building a life with someone and then finding yourself standing in the middle of it without them. So when Derek suggested, about 14 months after Margaret died, that he and Stacy were thinking about buying a house and were having trouble with the down payment, I listened. When he mentioned that they'd found a place they loved but were about $8,000 short, I told him I'd think about it. I want to be honest here. I had some hesitation. Derek had borrowed money from us before twice during his 20s, and the repayment had been slow and incomplete both times. Margaret had been more patient about it than I was. But I told myself this was different. This was his mother's death year. This was grief and upheaval and trying to build something stable. I decided to help. I told him I'd give him $5,000 and consider the rest a gift. He thanked me. Stacy sent a card. They bought the house in April. That should have been the end of it. But the calls kept coming. Not about connection anymore, about money. A car repair in June. An investment opportunity in August that he wanted me to consider. Stacy's comment in September. During a Sunday dinner at my house. About how much the property taxes on their new place were costing them. The way she looked around my living room when she said it. The way her eyes moved across Margaret's music boxes on the shelf. I noticed. I didn't say anything. But I noticed. Then in October, Derek brought up my house. He did it carefully. The way you do when you've rehearsed something. He mentioned that the housing market in Dayton was strong. He mentioned that my house was bigger than I needed now that I was alone. He mentioned very casually that if I were ever thinking about downsizing, he and Stacy would want to be involved in that conversation. What does that mean? I said, involved in that conversation. He backtracked immediately. Said he just meant he wanted to make sure I was taken care of. Said he wasn't trying to pressure me. Said he was just thinking about my future. I let it go. But I started paying closer attention. What I noticed, once I started paying attention, was small at first. A drawer in my home office that I was certain I'd left closed. Left open. A folder on my desk moved slightly. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to and say definitively, this has been gone through. Just the faint, uncomfortable feeling that the private spaces in my own home were not as private as they'd been. I also noticed that Derek had started asking questions about Margaret's estate, about what had been settled and what hadn't, about whether I had a will, about whether I'd spoken to a financial advisor. The questions came in pieces, spread over weeks, so that no single conversation felt like an interrogation. But taken together, they formed a pattern I recognized from 31 years of watching students try to hide what they were really after. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted to be a suspicious old man who was misreading his own son's concern. Then one morning in November, I woke up and looked at the nightstand and the music box was gone. I stood there for a long time. I thought maybe I was still half asleep. I thought maybe I had moved it myself without remembering. Grief does strange things to memory. And I was aware of that. I checked the shelf in the living room. I checked the hallway cabinet. I checked the dining room sideboard, where Margaret sometimes placed things temporarily when she was dusting. It wasn't anywhere. I called Derek. He didn't answer. I called again an hour later. He picked up on the fourth ring, and before I'd said more than 3 sentences, before I'd even finished describing what I was looking for, he said, "Dad, I need to tell you something." He told me he'd taken it. He said he'd found a buyer, an antique dealer in Cincinnati, who had expressed interest in the music box collection, and that he'd sold the walnut one because he thought it might be the most valuable. He said he'd gotten $1,100 for it and had already put the money toward a plumbing repair at the new house. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was aware of my own breathing. I was aware of the nightstand beside me with the empty space where the box had sat for 23 years. "You sold your mother's music box," I said finally. "It was just sitting there. Dad, it's not like you were playing it. It was just sitting there." I repeated, "I was going to tell you. I just needed to handle the repair first, and I knew You went into my bedroom." I said, "You went into my home without asking me. You went into my bedroom, and you took something that belonged to your mother." He started explaining again. The plumbing, the cost, the fact that he'd thought I wouldn't mind, the fact that it was just an object. I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Then I picked up my phone again and called the antique dealer in Cincinnati. Derek had at least had the decency or the carelessness to leave the receipt on my kitchen counter. The dealer's name was Raymond Schultz, and his shop was called Schultz & Sons Antiques on Madison Road. Raymond answered on the second ring. I explained who I was. I explained that the music box had been taken from my home without my permission and sold to him, and that I would like to buy it back. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Gerald," Raymond said, "I'm very glad you called. I was actually going to try to reach you." I asked him why, because when I was examining the piece after I purchased it, he said, "I noticed something. The base of the box, the bottom panel, it's not flush the way factory pieces are. I've handled a lot of antiques in 30 years. And when something doesn't sit right, you learn to look closer." He paused again. "There's a hidden compartment in the base. Sir, I don't believe your son noticed it." It took me about an hour, with the right light and the right angle, to find the release mechanism. My heart was doing something strange. "What's inside it?" I asked. "I haven't opened it fully." He said, "I could see there was something in there. But once I realized this piece may have been taken without the owner's full knowledge." I stopped. I didn't think it was my place. I drove to Cincinnati that same afternoon. Raymond Schultz was a man in his late 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the careful, deliberate manner of someone who had spent decades handling things that mattered to other people. His shop smelled like lemon oil and old wood. He had Margaret's music box on a velvet cloth on his workbench. He showed me the mechanism, a small inlaid piece of decorative wood near the back left corner of the base that, when pressed at the right angle, released a thin panel. The compartment underneath was maybe an inch deep and 4 inches wide. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small brass key. My hands weren't entirely steady when I picked up the paper. Raymond stepped back to give me space, which I appreciated. The handwriting was Margaret's. I knew it before I'd read a single word. The slightly left-leaning letters, the way she looped her G's, the particular way she wrote the date at the top of the page. The date was September 14. La Télégarchie, 2 months before she died. I am writing this for Gerald. She had written, because I know him well enough to know he will need to find it himself. When he is ready. And not before. I had to stop reading for a moment. That was so completely her, the understanding that some things have their own timing. That forcing a revelation before someone is ready to receive it is its own kind of cruelty. She wrote that she had spoken with our family attorney, a man named Wallace Pruitt, who had done our estate work for 15 years. She wrote that she had made some arrangements separately from our joint accounts, arrangements that she had not discussed with me because she had not wanted to worry me while she was sick. She wrote that the brass key opened a safe deposit box at the First Federal Branch on Warren Street, and that inside was a separate account she'd been building quietly for years, money she'd saved from her part-time bookkeeping work, money she'd set aside from her own inheritance when her mother passed, money she had specifically intended to remain separate and protected. She wrote, "I've watched Derek for a long time. Gerald, longer than you have. I think because mothers watch differently. I love him, but I don't trust him with your security. This money is yours. It is not to be shared. It is not to be discussed. It is for the years when you need help and when you need to be certain that the help is coming from the right place and not from someone waiting to see what you leave behind." I read that paragraph 3 times. She had seen it. She had seen what I was only beginning to see. And she had spent the last months of her life quietly building a wall around me without ever saying a word about it. She had known she couldn't say it directly, that I would resist, that I would defend my son, that I would call her worry unnecessary. So she had done it the only way she could. In the time she had left, and she had left me a key and a note, in the one place she trusted I would eventually find, except I hadn't found it. Not for 2 years. And I would never have found it at all if Derek hadn't stolen the box and sold it to a man careful enough to notice that the bottom wasn't right. There's a particular feeling that comes when the thing that was meant to hurt you ends up being the thing that saves you. I don't have a clean word for it. It's not happiness. It's not simple relief. It's something older and quieter, the feeling of being caught, in the best sense of the word, of being held by something you didn't know was there. I sat in Raymond Schultz's shop for a long time. He brought me a cup of coffee without being asked, and didn't try to fill the silence. When I finally looked up, I told him I would like to buy the music box back. He told me he would not accept payment for it. Some things shouldn't be transactions, he said, and pushed it across the velvet toward me. I went to First Federal on Warren Street the following morning. The box was exactly as Margaret had described, a separate account in her name alone, with a transfer on death designation. To me, the amount was more than I'd expected, more than enough, more than comfortable. I sat with Wallace Pruitt that same week. He was not surprised to hear from me. "Margaret told me you'd come in eventually," he said. "She just didn't know when." He had the paperwork ready. We went through everything carefully. Then I called Derek. He answered the way he'd been answering lately, cautious, testing the temperature before committing to a tone. I told him I needed him to come to the house on Saturday. I told him to bring Stacy. They arrived at 11 in the morning. Stacy had brought a plant, which struck me as an odd gesture for what she clearly knew was going to be a difficult conversation. She set it on the kitchen table with the brightness of someone performing normality. I had asked my neighbor Howard to be present. Howard was a retired county judge, and he had agreed without asking for much explanation. He sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and didn't say much. But his presence did what I needed it to do. I told Derek what I knew. I told him about the music box. I told him about the compartment and the key and the letter. I told him about the account. I watched his face go through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, recalculation, something that might have been embarrassment, and then finally a kind of careful blankness. He said he hadn't known about the compartment. He said he hadn't known about any of it. He said he was sorry about taking the box, that he had made a mistake, that he had been under financial pressure and hadn't been thinking clearly. I told him I believed the last part. Then I told him that I had reviewed, with Wallace, the full picture of what had been borrowed and not returned over the years, including the amounts from his 20s, including the $5,000 from the year before. I told him that Wallace had drawn up a simple document acknowledging that debt and establishing a repayment schedule. I told him that signing it was not optional. Stacy started to say something. Howard looked at her, not unkindly, and she stopped. Derek signed the document. I also told him that I had changed the locks the previous week, that I had installed a security system, and that going forward, no one entered my home without my knowledge and my explicit invitation. I told him this without accusation, just as information. As the terms of what came next, he nodded. He looked, I thought, a little younger than his 35 years. A little like the boy who used to climb the oak tree and then pretend he hadn't when he got too old for it. I told him I still loved him. I told him that would not change. But I told him that love was not the same thing as access, and that I was not going to confuse the two anymore. After they left, Howard and I sat on the back porch, and he told me about a similar situation with his own brother 30 years ago. He said it had taken him longer than it should have to see clearly. He said most people wait too long because they'd rather be deceived by someone they love than be right about something that hurts. I thought about that for a long time. That night I put the music box back on the nightstand. I opened the lid and let the melody play all the way through. It's a piece called Claire de Lune. I know that. Now I've finally looked it up. I don't know how I'd never known that before. I sat in the bedroom in the dark and listened to it and thought about Margaret in a Vermont estate sale, paying $40 for a box with a secret she hadn't told me yet, and the smile she would have had on her face knowing that someday, somehow, I would be sitting exactly where I was sitting right now. She always did know me better than I knew myself. I want to say one more thing, because I know some of you watching this have children who have disappointed you, or parents who took more than they should have, or family members who looked at what you'd built together and saw only what they could take from it. And I know how difficult it is to hold two true things at once, that you love someone and that you cannot trust them, that they are family, and that family does not entitle anyone to your peace. Margaret understood that. She understood it clearly enough to act on it while she was dying, which is a kind of love I still have trouble fully taking in. If she was watching, and I have my own private feelings about whether she was, I think she'd be satisfied, not smug about it. She was never smug, just satisfied, in the quiet way she had. The way she'd hand you the wrong book, and then smile when you came back. The music box is back where it belongs. The secret did exactly what it was meant to do. And I am, for the first time in 2 years, not afraid of what happens next. If this story reached you today, I hope it gave you something you needed. If you're carrying something similar, I hope you find your music box. I hope someone who loved you thought ahead. Thank you for listening.